Hello, I'm Vic Armstrong, Vice President for Health Equity and Engagement with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or AFSP. It is my pleasure to welcome you to AFSP's Virtual Health Equity Summit. The summit was originally intended to be held in person, but as we heard from many of you, that while you had a desire to attend, you were met with programmatic and travel budget cuts impacting your ability to do so. In order to accommodate, we opted to pivot to a series of three virtual webinars, the first occurring today, with subsequent webinars occurring in November and December. We are hopeful that converting the event to online will enable many more people to contribute to the conversation. Today, I'll be sharing about the Upright, a recent AFSP initiative rebranding our health equity work, as well as amplifying AFSP's approach to health equity and engaging with communities. You will also hear from experts in the field who will share information and insights on health equity and suicide prevention. And then finally, in today's program Spotlight, you will hear from Community Life's Life is Precious program, a community based program based in New York City that supports Latina girls ages 13 to 18. This webinar will contain subject matter related to mental health and suicide. And as a reminder, if you or someone you know is in crisis, call or text 988 for free 24/7 to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So let's begin. Research identifies any number of factors that can impact communities, the end result being a disproportionate impact on suicide rates. AFSP recognizes the importance of research in making decisions that impact health outcomes for the communities we serve. These factors can include things like access to healthy food, stable housing, and lack of access to education and employment, or challenges specific to sexual orientation or gender identity. We also recognize the challenges experienced by communities who have historically lacked vital access to care, such as rural communities or those living with disabilities. And we recognize the intersectionality that can lead to disproportionate rates of suicide in professions such as our first responders, veterans, or even those in the construction industry or medical field. You see, health equity is not only about race and ethnicity, it is about ensuring that all members of the community have the opportunity to live the healthiest life. It is about population health. Traditional methodologies designed to address suicide prevention strategies have not always been informed by the very communities they are meant to address. AFSP has been on a health equity journey in which we use our resources, relationships, and position to catalyze both local and national efforts to address inequities by building upon our current health equity work that seeks collaboration and community led approaches to suicide prevention. This approach allows us to create resources that are culturally relevant, relatable to the lived experience of the communities we are serving, and perhaps most importantly, resources that communities are willing to utilize. Because historically, communities have been much more unwilling to engage in resources that they cannot understand, that they fear, or that they simply cannot see themselves in. On a personal note, one of the factors that led me to join the staff at AFSP a little over 2 years ago was something I recognized during my years as a volunteer for AFSP in my home state of North Carolina. And that was the recognition that AFSP began on this path of health equity and engaging communities long before it became trendy during the COVID years. AFSP was already doing work in this health equity space, and that work has continued to evolve. It is our mission to save lives and bring hope to those impacted by suicide. But it is our methodology to ensure that communities have a voice in creating our resources, including our programs, policy, research initiatives, and messaging. As a means of creating space to house and allow access to our AFSP health equity focused resources and initiatives, AFSP created the Upright. The Upright is essentially a way of rebranding our health equity efforts and creating a repository that makes it easier for people to find our resources and to follow our journey. It also helps us to demonstrate a holistic approach to health equity by bringing our programs, research, media and communications, and our policy and advocacy work under one umbrella. The Upright addresses and demonstrates our commitment to partnering with communities, amplifying their voices, and building sustainable suicide prevention resources, reflecting a community's needs and experiences. The upright, in a sense, right sizes the way suicide prevention work has historically engaged communities, rather than a top down approach where resources and services are created often without community input, let alone being community led, and then imposed upon communities. The upright emphasizes doing it the other way around. Communities know what they need and what will work for them. Thus, we created the upright with the tagline connecting communities, driving change. We are leaders in the suicide prevention space. And as such, we see it as our responsibility to lead the field in approaching suicide prevention that is created by and with communities, as opposed to being created for communities. Visit our website and learn more about the Upright at afsp.org/the Upright. And now I will turn things over to our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Christine U. Moutier, who will introduce our guest presenters. Dr. Moutier.
Thank you so much, Vic. And I really would like to offer my own word of welcome to everybody and express just how exciting it is to come together around this important topic of health equity in suicide prevention. This requires all of us to put on a cloak of humility and learning and listening. And I am so excited to introduce our next couple of experts who will each share with you their expertise for about 15 minutes each. And then we'll have the treat of coming together, the three of us, in discussion. And please do go ahead and put your questions and comments in the chat. And we will try to interweave as much of those ideas and questions as possible into our discussion. So with that, I would like to introduce our two expert speakers, Doctors Ruth Shim and Sherry Davis Malloch. And I'll start by introducing Dr. Shim. Dr. Ruth Shim is the Luke and Grace Kim Professor in Cultural Psychiatry at University of California, Davis Health. Dr. Shim has served on the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Board of Trustees since 2019 and serves on the editorial boards of many publications, including JAMA Psychiatry and Community Mental Health Journal. She is co-editor of the books The Social Determinants of Mental Health and Social Injustice and Mental Health. And next, I will introduce Dr. Sherry Davis Malloch, who will follow Dr. Shim's talk. Dr. Sherry Davis Malloch is a professor of psychology at the George Washington University and pastor emeritus of Beloved Community Church. Her research focuses on risk and protective factors in suicide, as well as help-seeking behaviors in African-American adolescents and young adults, developing suicide and HIV prevention programs in African-American faith-based communities, and HIV risk and suicidal behaviors in young African-American men. Dr. Malloch was a member of the scientific work group that served as advisors for the Congressional Black Caucus's Emergency Task Force on Suicide Prevention for Black Youth, and is the recipient of AFSP, our focus grant, to implement suicide prevention programs for Black youth in predominantly Black churches. So with that, I'd like to welcome first Dr. Ruth Shim to the stage. So Dr. Shim, please join us and take it away.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that introduction. I'm really pleased to be joining you all here today. I want to take the time that I have, the brief few moments that I have, to present a framework for health equity that hopefully guides this conversation and the focus of our talk today. So if we start off thinking about health equity, I want to make a distinction between two important concepts. One is health disparities and the other is health inequities. And I want to share with you all why I tend to not use the term health disparities when we talk about these issues. Even though it's a perfectly reasonable term and we use it all the time, it's not a term that I tend to use, and I'll explain to you why. But this health disparities definition comes from the World Health Organization, and they describe differences in health status among distinct segments of the population, including differences that occur by gender, race or ethnicity, education or income, disability, or where you might happen to live. And I'd like to contrast that with the definition of health inequities, as health inequities are defined as disparities in health that are the result of systemic, avoidable, and unjust social and economic policies and practices that create barriers to opportunity. So the reason that, even though health disparities describes the topic really well, the reason I don't tend to use that term is because when we talk about health disparities, we're not naming what the cause of those differences in health are. We're just saying that there are differences in health, but we're not saying why. And if you notice with this health inequities definition, we're describing systemic, avoidable, and unjust social and economic policies and practices as the cause of these differences in health that we see. And so that becomes really important, because if we don't name the cause of why we see differences in health, we tend to operate under what is called the individualistic fallacy, or this belief that the cause has to do with individuals or groups of people or certain populations. And it has to do either with cultural values and beliefs of certain populations, or with biological or genetic differences between different populations. And what we do know is actually the systemic, avoidable, and unjust social and economic policies and practices are the things that are really driving these differences that we see within communities and within populations as it relates to health. And we can think about that as it relates to all types of health, including mental health, as well as suicide and suicide prevention. Just as an example of why I tend to focus in on health inequities versus health disparities relates to the illness of depression. So we know that major depressive disorder is one of the most common illnesses that exists in our society. About 25% of people will experience depression at some point in their lifetime. We know it is a huge risk factor for suicide. But what we also know is that women tend to have higher rates of depression, lifetime rates of depression, compared to men. And when we think about what causes that disparity or difference in health, a lot of times we tend to believe in that individualistic fallacy. We've spent a lot of time and a lot of energy focusing in on differences between men and women that relate to hormones, or what we consider to be biological differences. So people have spent, and scientists and very smart people have spent a lot of time focusing in and trying to understand, is there some sort of problematic factor related to estrogen that's leading to higher rates of depression? Or is testosterone some type of protective factor against depression? And that is a very reasonable hypothesis, but what it leaves out is the ways in which we live in a deeply patriarchal society, in which women are much more likely to experience oppression, marginalization, and policies that harm women and prevent women from experiencing their greatest potential. And those unjust social and economic policies and practices are really driving these differences in health that we often see. And much more of an explanation of why we see these differences in health compared to things like estrogen and testosterone. And so if we're going to consider that, we have to think about the social determinants of mental health. And the social determinants of mental health are defined, again, by the World Health Organization as the societal, environmental, and economic conditions that impact and affect mental health outcomes across various populations. These conditions are shaped by the distribution of money, power, and resources at global, national, and local levels, which are themselves influenced by policy choices. And the social determinants of health are prominently responsible for health disparities and inequities we see both within and among populations. And so if we were to put all of this together into a framework, this is a framework on the social determinants of mental health as created by myself and Dr. Michael Compton. And as you start at the top of the figure, at the height of the figure, you see adverse mental health outcomes and mental health inequities. And as you move down the figure, you're actually moving further upstream. So one step upstream from adverse mental health outcomes and mental health inequities are risk factors, or all sorts of things that we define as risk factors. For instance, if we define a risk factor as something that precedes a condition and increases one's likelihood that they might develop that condition, then risk factors can look like things like reduced options or poor choices. They can be behavioral, they can be physiologic stress responses, or they can be psychological stress. And when we think about suicide prevention, we spend a lot of time identifying risk factors. But the challenge there is that many of the risk factors that we attempt to identify are not mutable. They're not changeable, especially in the moment of crisis. And so if we're thinking, how might we intervene? How might we prevent a risk factor from developing and leading to adverse mental health outcomes and mental health inequities? We have to move further upstream. And if we were to move further upstream, that's where we would get into this state of what we call the social determinants of mental health, or we also call them the fundamental causes of disease, as Bruce Link and Joe Phelan refer to them, or as Sir Geoffrey Rose and Sir Michael Marmot refer to them as the causes of the causes. So those things that occurred before the development of the risk factor that set the context for the creation of that risk factor, which then led to those poor outcomes. And so you can see in these boxes in the center that the social determinants of mental health are things like adverse early life experiences and discrimination and exposure to violence and interaction with the criminal justice system, as well as things like low education, unemployment and underemployment, poverty, income inequality, area level poverty, homelessness and housing instability, food insecurity, transportation insecurity, poor access to healthcare, and adverse features of the built environment, including neighborhood disorder, pollution, exposure, and climate change. This is not an exhaustive list of every social determinant of mental health that exists in society, but this is a starting place for a discussion. And so as we see these social determinants of mental health, they work to set the context for the creation of the risk factor. We have to think about the fact that even though these social determinants are really important, they are also still difficult to change. And there's also something driving or creating the context that is developing these social determinants as well. So there's things actually happening even further upstream from the social determinants that's leading to these poor outcomes. And so if we were to go even further upstream from the social determinants of mental health, that's where we get to what is driving the development of these social determinants. And that's unfair and unjust distribution of opportunity, or social injustice. And we could refer to social injustice as the causes of the causes of the causes. They are the things that are setting the foundation for the development of these inequities that then lead to poor outcomes in health. And under all of this, underneath all of the social injustice and the unfair and unjust distribution of opportunity in our society are two fundamental concepts: social norms and public policies. Our social norms are our societal perspectives on how we view people and how we view populations, and why we tend to believe that certain populations and certain groups are worthy of advantage in our society, and other populations are worthy of disadvantage. It is kind of our fundamental belief systems about which communities have value and which communities are less valuable in our eyes. And then based on those belief systems, based on those ideas about who has more value and who has less value as a society, we then create public policies, laws, tenets, morals, values, based on those social norms. And those laws and policies tend to advantage certain populations, laws that create benefits for certain populations, and then laws that create disadvantage or tend to punish populations. And so those social norms interact with those public policies to create unfair and unjust distribution of opportunity, which then drives the social determinants of mental health and creates the social determinants of mental health, which then leads to poor risk factors and then leads to adverse mental health outcomes or mental health inequities. So if we're thinking then, how do we intervene? How do we fix this problem? We actually have to get down to these core drivers of this issue. We have to get down to changing our social norms, changing our belief systems about who in our society is inherently valuable and who is less so. And we also have to really focus in on our laws and our policies and make sure that our policies are appropriately benefiting and elevating people, all people, including communities that we tend to attribute less value or less importance to. And so in the time that I have left, I really want to talk about another framework that I like to share around health inequities and how health inequities, how we might intervene. So we're currently in the state of inequality, which is unequal access to opportunities. And as you can see here by this figure, when we're in a state of inequality, not everybody gets the same opportunities, not everybody gets the same access, which is where we are in society right now, unfortunately. One of the challenges with that is that lots of really smart people have tried to address inequalities in our society. And one way that people believe that you can appropriately address inequalities is through this concept of equality. Equality is focused primarily on fairness. Fairness is when you equally distribute tools and assistance. Equality is the mindset that whatever we do for one population and for one group, we have to do the exact same thing for another group. We can't give one group more. We can't promote or elevate one group or provide more resources or more support for one group over another group. Again, like I said, this is currently the mentality of a lot of people in our society that are attempting to address inequalities. The problem, as you can see with this figure, is that when we focus on fairness, it doesn't really address those populations that have been systematically discriminated against, systematically oppressed in our society. And so one of the ways to address this issue is to focus in on equity. And equity is when we customize tools to identify and address the inequality. So you give the particular population what it needs, and it may even be more than what another population needs, but you provide that specific intervention or that specific tool or that particular program or policy to benefit that particular population. And you can see in this figure that if you customize the tools to the particular population, it begins to start to address some of the inequality that exists in our society. But unfortunately, it's not enough just to focus on equity. It's a starting place, but we have to pair equity with justice. And justice is when we fix the system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. So we're talking about interventions that are addressing those public policies that have inappropriately benefited and harmed or punished populations. And so when we focus in on fixing the system, we're really about creating new societies in which we're trying to address systemic racism, systemic sexism, discrimination, oppression, and the way that marginalized groups have not benefited from the same equal opportunities and access as other populations. So I just want to end in thinking a little bit about kind of where we are in our system right now. And we talk about, Vic mentioned where we are in terms of trends. We saw after COVID and in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and many others, we saw a lot of progress as it relates to racial equality and racial equity. We saw lots of changes in legislation and court rulings and other formal mechanisms to try to address the ways that certain populations are discriminated against in our society, and certain populations are the victims of structural discrimination that harm populations. But what we see is that with progress, as we can see in the system that we're in now, with progress, there comes retrenchment. And retrenchment refers to the ways in which progress is very often challenged, neutralized, or undermined in key policy arenas. And we are unfortunately in a moment of deep retrenchment in our society right now. And it means that if we're not prepared for the retrenchment, which really is a sign of progress, which really speaks to the ways in which progress is actually happening, if we're not prepared for that retrenchment, we can get we can feel a lot of despair and a lot of hopelessness in the times that we're in. And so I want to leave you all with this statement from Congressperson John Lewis, who stated, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." So I thank you for the time, and I'd like to pass it over to Sherry.
Thank you, Ruth, for that great presentation. There's some overlap in our presentations, which is good. That means it'll when you get exposed to things multiple times, then it sinks in better. So that's good. So I'm going to be talking with you all specifically about suicide prevention. As I said earlier, Ruth and I, we have some overlap in our presentations, which is good because sometimes it's good to have concepts reiterated. So suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth between the ages of 10 and 19. And unfortunately, we know that suicide attempts rose by 73% between 1991 and 2017 for Black adolescents, while the injury by attempt rose 122% for adolescent boys during the same time period. This is the recent data from the CDC, the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is a survey that comes out every 2 years. And they collect data from high school students in about 38 states and jurisdictions. And the sad news about this is that these rates are going up for most groups. So if you just look at the number of young people who or high school students who felt sad or hopeless almost every day for at least 2 weeks in a row, to the point where they stopped doing and engaging in their usual activities during the 12 months preceding the administration of the survey, you can see that American Indian and Native American, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders have the highest rates of feeling sad and hopelessness, followed by Hispanic youth and multiracial youth. You also will see a familiar pattern of females being almost 3 times as likely to report, twice as likely to report feeling sad or hopeless during the last 2 weeks, and that's a pretty consistent pattern. Unfortunately, another consistent pattern is that when you look at these questions amongst LGBTQ youth versus heterosexual youth, that the LGBTQ youth always have twice or 3 times as much rate in terms of having difficulties or mental health challenges. And so you'll see that throughout the data. This is looking at young people or high schoolers who attempted suicide, looking at gender differences, sexual orientation, and race and ethnicity. Here you see once again that females are more likely to say they attempted suicide over the prior 12 months. LGBTQ youth are more likely to say that than heterosexual youth. And if you look at the racial and ethnic differences, you'll notice that Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, American Indian, Alaskan Natives, and multiracial and Black youth have elevated rates compared to Asian and white students. Just want to briefly show you this slide. It's a pretty commonly used slide about levels of prevention, only because we sometimes use the word prevention interchangeably, and there's different kinds of interventions. So interventions can be universal, which is looking at a situation where everyone gets an intervention or exposed to the intervention regardless of their risk. Selective interventions are when the intervention goes to a group whose risk is considered to be above normal or above what's typical. And then you have indicated, which are people who are showing early signs. Most of our interventions are in the recovery phase, where people have already shown significant impairment, and we're sort of these are people maybe in crisis. And as Ruth said earlier, what we like people to focus on is the left-hand side of this curve. So focus on interventions or preventions that are much earlier, because you can have better outcomes, and also in some areas, depending on the the intervention that you select, you can also have it may be more cost effective. So just something for us to keep in mind. Whenever you're doing intervention research or clinically, you want to look at risk and protective factors. Ruth talked about this a little bit as well. Risk factors are characteristics that increase the likelihood that a person will develop a problematic behavior. Risk factors can change over time, so they're not static. And they are at multiple levels, so they can be at the individual level, the family level, the community level, or the broader structural level. So some risk factors for suicide for youth can include family history of suicide, history of depression or other mental health challenges, incarceration. Young people who are caught in the school to prison pipeline are at risk for suicide at every step or stage of that system. Having easy access to lethal means, alcohol and substance use, being a member of a sexual minority group, having some kind of loss, and exposure to racial discrimination and or trauma. One of the things that I love that Ruth talked about was the issue around looking at equity versus looking at equality and disparities. And also because she really focused on the importance of looking at suicide risk assessment at a much broader level than we typically do. Normally when we're doing suicide risk assessment, we're looking at individual behavior, looking for a history of mental health challenges, either in the person or in their family. But my colleagues and I wrote a paper that came out about 2 years ago in the American Psychologist, where we really encourage you to look at this at a broader level and think about doing prevention at a much broader level. So we talked about this in terms of a societal context, institutional context, neighborhood context, and family context. An example of a societal context is looking at stigma, not just within the individual, but also within your community. So what is your community's understanding of what it means to have suicidal behavior or suicidal thoughts? What is your community's thought and behavior around mental health help seeking? Because if you are living in a community where there's a lot of stigma associated with mental health seeking, if you put a clinic on every corner, it wouldn't make a difference because of the stigma attached. So you have to look at this at multiple levels at the same time. Certainly looking at exposure to racism and discrimination, and looking at that intersectionally. So it's not just racial discrimination, but it also could be sexism, and it could also be heterosexism as well. At the institutional level, you can look at access to healthcare. A lot of times when I do talks with healthcare systems, I ask them to, how easy or difficult is it for your clients to navigate your health system? And do you need a PhD to figure that out? Particularly when people are in crisis, it's very difficult to have multiple barriers or challenges to access, particularly during a crisis situation. Neighborhood context, community violence, but also what are the things about the community that are protected? Because we often think about risk factors without simultaneously looking at protective factors, which is really important. And then looking at family history and values and racial and ethnic socialization are just some examples. Looking at protective factors. So when you're doing interventions and preventions in suicide, you want to decrease risk factors and increase protective factors at the same time. Protective factors can be grouped into 5 categories, which include family and social support, religious and spiritual engagement, personal factors like good self-esteem, strong academic performance, and factors such as stable family, housing, income, and employment. What many of those protective factors have in common is that they make people have a sense of connectedness, and also one of my favorite concepts, mattering. So social connectedness, again, can be at multiple levels. It can be at the individual level. Do you have a circle of friends? Do you have people that you can count on, you can depend on? You can have friends and acquaintances. And at the community level, do you live in a socially cohesive community? People can live in communities where the income levels are not as high, but if there's a strong sense of social cohesiveness, then that serves as a protective factor. I think about my own childhood. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and my entire extended family and my mother's side, we all lived within about a mile and a half of each other. So even if my parents weren't home, there were multiple houses I could go to. And I remember thinking that in my family, there was no such thing as hiring a babysitter. The older cousins, I'm in the older group, we babysat the younger ones. So everything was very family centered. And a lot of our support systems were with cousins, aunts, and uncles. And then the concept of mattering, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. Mattering is, do you make a difference in the lives of others around you? And that people don't just notice when you're present, but they notice when you're absent. People care about what you think. They care about how you feel. When things are going well for you, they celebrate with you, but they also lament with you when things are not going as well. And so the extent to which people feel like they don't matter is the extent to which they feel like they are marginalized, which we definitely know is a risk factor for suicide. So what are the things that we can do to help children not just survive, but thrive? And what are the things we can do to minimize and eliminate risk factors and enhance protective factors at the same time? And Ruth talked about this upstream approach or primary prevention. If you look at this picture, there are lots of different diagrams and figures that represent this same idea. But notice that we're not waiting for people to fall into the waterfall and into the water, which is tertiary care or crisis intervention. That's important, but what we also want people to do is build the bridge over the water so that people don't even fall into the water. And that's what primary prevention does. It's an upstream approach that tries to prevent things from happening or try to prevent crisis from happening in the first place. It's not that we can't get you out of the water, but it takes a lot more effort and it's a lot more costly in terms of time and resources than if we can prevent you from falling in the water in the first place. So I'm just going to close with a couple of examples of upstream approaches for suicide prevention. One of the things I like to talk about, which echoes what Ruth said earlier, is this concept of resilience. And we often do tailor our interventions so that we really want to help young people become more resilient. And that's okay, and that's an important idea, but it's not enough. Because part of the issue is people who are resilient or children who are resilient are like dandelions and they can bust through concrete. But why are we raising children to bust through concrete? So we need to also change the environment and the institutions and structures around us that perpetuate the problem, what we call the cause of the cause of the cause. So it's not enough to say we can help people become more resilient and bust through concrete. We really want to become gardeners and nurture the soil. And so one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves as a society is, are we tilling the soil? Or are we creating fertile soil for children to grow up in? Or are we creating toxic systems which people have to navigate? So I want to talk about just some examples of primary prevention. Strengthening economic supports like housing, food stability, making sure that people have a livable wage goes a long way. Strengthening access and delivery of suicidal care, so coverage of mental health conditions and health insurance policies, reducing provider shortages in underserved communities, also increasing culturally competent providers. It will take us years, decades to have enough competent providers. And so we also need to do community-based interventions that rely on the community resources, particularly human resources, so that people can get help while we're waiting to develop and promote competent providers. So we can also do suicide prevention, primary prevention through system changes, which can include training first responders and comprehensive screening systems. Promoting connectedness through peer norm programs that promote help seeking, like Sources of Strength, partnering with faith-based communities like ASFP's Soul Shop, and partnering with and encouraging community engagement. I love developing partnerships. It's what my research is based on. It's also what my graduate students learn how to do. Why? Because the community oftentimes has resources and practices that you may not know about that are really very effective in preventing suicide. And we need to harness all of that good knowledge and wisdom and work together so that we don't assume that because we're in the academic or scientific community that we know more than the community knows about what they need, and also about how we can alleviate some of the problems that we have now. Clearly, we need to address barriers to partnering, and so there is distrust and miscommunication between the communities and mental health providers or researchers. Researchers and mental health professionals in particular need to value the models and metaphors that the community has to offer, involve the community at the beginning of the prevention effort, and don't minimize concerns expressed about past abuses, and to compromise and be flexible. So I think that we need to think about, this is just me giving you an example, Haven, which is a program that we're currently running in New York State. Haven stands for Helping Alleviate Valley Experiences Now. It's a comprehensive depression and suicide intervention for youth that's designed to be integrated in predominantly Black churches. It involves church engagement, a faith-based curriculum where we teach pastors and youth leaders how to incorporate information about suicide prevention and particularly enhancing protective factors in sermons, Bible studies, and or Sunday schools. And also there's a youth intervention specifically around suicide. So small group leaders are recruited from the churches, which receive a total of 10 and a half hours of training to help them run small breakout groups. We get input in terms from the pastors of the church, the leaders, and the adults and parents throughout the entire program so that they're allowed to tweak it and tailor it to meet the needs of their church. The pastors engage in one sermon, and some of them do a series on focusing on the core protective factors. And they can also opt to do Bible study or Sunday school lessons using these concepts. There's also the Youth Connect program, which enhances the 4 core protective factors, which are kinship, guidance, purpose, and balance. And the youth participate in 3 90-minute, highly engaging interactive modules that help them to enhance the protective factors and also to talk about how to use this in their daily lives. So my closing comment to you all is, can we all come together and be gardeners of our communities? With community organizations and institutions, and mental health community are called to be gardeners. We're called to tend the ground and cultivate the plants. And we need to focus much more on transforming rather than bandaging people, and to remember that it does take a village. Thank you.
That was just phenomenal. The framework, the depth, the inspiration, the hope. You both are clearly living this and kind of walking the talk. And I just really loved everything and how you said it, the illustrations, the metaphors. Ruth, your tree picture just paints that the picture of the concept about those differences between how we think of inequality and the common solution in based inequality versus equity and justice. And I think I'll start, I'll kick things off with a question to you, Ruth. In terms of this, and we do hear the concept of embedding equity in our work, and we certainly at AFSP are trying to do that, wearing this lens through which we see the world and our work through this equity lens. But I would love it if you could just speak to the challenges of embedding equity into a historically inequitable system, and just give us a few more kind of tips around that, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the huge challenge, especially in our current climate and environment, right? Especially when there's a lot of retrenchment and a lot of aggression about trying to prevent equitable interventions and embedding equity into the work that we do, it becomes even harder now to think about these things. But one of the strategies that I think people can employ is to think about really, and it's actually to build on what Sherry already said, it's one of the easiest ways, I think, to start embedding equity into the work that you do is to really go into communities and listen to communities specifically, and to really treat community members and people living in communities as the experts. I think there is this tendency, and it relates to that idea of our social norms about people. There's our tendency to decide that certain communities don't have expertise, or certain communities have less expertise. And so one of the quickest ways to really start to center equity in work and embed it in the work that we're doing is to go into those communities and elevate and support those community members with making sure that people understand how much expertise is located in those communities. And so bringing that time and expertise and compensation, appropriate compensation for that, equal partnerships, building those relationships, it's the fastest way to kind of build that work, because those experts can really guide that equity work for you, rather than you trying to kind of figure out like, what should I be doing here? It's really about just centering the people that have that expertise. It's hard to do just because our society hasn't been structured that way. And even if we think about like who has power and who has control, and trying to like shift that, trying to embed equity as well as trying to address issues of justice requires to kind of reshape the ways we've thought about society, and really think more broadly about shifting where power is located. And so that becomes the challenging part about embedding equity into this work. It's about changing your mindset to kind of think more about shifting power to voices and to people that have not necessarily had power in the past.
Yeah, I love that. And I think there's an application that gets out of the abstract that becomes a little bit overwhelming to think about. And in that sense, each of us lives and works in smaller environments where we may underestimate the role that we play in lifting those up who haven't traditionally been seen through that lens of, who holds value or power. So I love that. And just thinking about, the practical things that we can do in our everyday lives. Sherry, you are doing such incredible work to apply these principles of equity and justice and listening to the community, and really living out, forming these partnerships at the very grassroots level. It makes me think about how every people group has their trusted people, their trusted resources. And certainly in Black and Brown communities, there is probably data to speak to the likelihood that somebody who's going through a tough time, mental health distress, or even suicidal crisis may seek out a faith leader before they consider going to a health professional. And I would love if you would just talk about some of that in your own work and what you've learned in terms of how to bridge between those two trusted resources, because of course they're both really important in people's lives, and it shouldn't be one versus the other.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, because I think there's a couple of things that are functioning there. One is that I think mental health professionals in the research community, and I'm a member of both, we can sometimes be arrogant that we are the harbinger of all knowledge, and even like what knowledge counts. So one of the things I think that's really helpful in going to communities is understand there's different ways of knowing, and recognizing that your way of knowing and what you use as quote unquote objective data to validate your truth, they use something different, and it's not better than or less than or inferior or superior. It's just different. And so I think when I was working inside of churches, I was noticing that people would come to talk to me after the service, and there would literally sometimes be lines of people to talk to me about mental health challenges. And I would say, oh, well, we can't have privacy or confidentiality here, so let's make an appointment next week. And they didn't want to do that. And so I was trying to figure out, okay, you know that I wear the both hats. So I'm a trusted person in your community, but you don't want to officially have a mental health challenge. So I was thinking, what are other ways that we can work together as mental health communities and honor each other's expertise, and not assume that one way of knowing is superior or better than another, but also work together, because I think sometimes the mental health community and the faith community are at odds with each other. Some of that's because we both have outdated views about what our reality and what our truth is. And so we don't talk to each other. And because we don't talk to each other, we misunderstand each other. And so I think on the faith side, having to share with people that psychiatrists are not there to take away Jesus from you if you're a Christian background. And we actually respect and think of faith and spirituality as a tool and as a resource. That's one. And then letting the scientific community know that the faith community may not care about your randomized clinical trial, but they do know, they can tell you when people feel better because it's in front of them, right? And they haven't done a screening or anything, but they can see people, and they're in their lives on a daily basis much more than you are. So trying to figure out, we both have common goals, and how can we achieve those goals together, including understanding we have different metaphors and different ways of seeing the world, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I'll never forget when you told me the story of during COVID and the adoption rates for vaccines, and how your own community came together and lifted up members of the congregation who had expertise, an infectious disease expert or others who then, through weekly gatherings, really produced a level of behavior change and adoption that could be both and in terms of
Right.
trusting one's own instincts and community members, but also that public health model.
We had a member of our church who's a neonatologist, and for the entire pandemic, she gave a talk every Sunday called "There's a Doctor in the House." It's 5 minutes. And we had 100% vaccination rate in my church, children and adults. And also what was beautiful about that, at one point there was a shortage. People were networking with each other, including us, telling us where to go get a vaccine. So literally I had people texting me, Pastor Sherry, this place is open, go right now so you can get your vaccine. But a lot of that eagerness to help others was a trusted person talking about the vaccine and also sifting through all the misinformation that we unfortunately heard in the media at times. And so because she was a trusted person, and also we all took shots of us at this point, beginning of the pandemic, they would let you take a picture of it. We all took pictures of us getting vaccinated, and we would share those pictures every week.
Yeah, it's just so many different concepts there. It's in a way like setting social norms, like we've been hearing about. And
If I could just add to that, just because, it's funny, I talk often about how when we think about the COVID pandemic and the discussions about how certain communities have vaccine hesitancy, and we talk a lot about how certain cultural groups like Black people have a hesitancy about vaccines. Sherry's example is really poignant in terms of how communities can come together to overcome that. But it also reminds me of data that I like to share, and I cannot remember the source right now, but about how people who live in predominantly Black neighborhoods during the COVID pandemic had to go significantly farther to get to the first COVID vaccination site than people who live in predominantly white neighborhoods. And so what we're noticing here is that another reason people weren't getting vaccinated had a lot to do with structural racism and residential segregation, and like the relics of residential segregation, that people were actually placing COVID vaccination sites farther away from Black neighborhoods and Black communities. And so it's not enough just to say, oh, we have to like go to these communities and bring trusted messengers, which is very important. But just as important is people have to be able to have access to the same services. And this is an example, I think, of structural norms and policies that have led to difficulties in access. And if we're not recognizing that these structural barriers exist, then we're not necessarily solving that problem, because we're thinking that the issue is something different than what it is.
I would also add to what Ruth just said is really important. I think we forget that healthcare is a system in and of itself, and it also has its own culture. And so whenever we're trying to navigate these systems, and the COVID is a good example of this, where I always think to myself, if it's this hard for me to do this and I'm a knowledgeable consumer, I'm not a typical consumer, then what must it be like for someone, particularly in a suicide crisis where you're already in crisis, you don't have time to figure out and navigate the system. And so when there are barriers there, including just where it's located, what happens when you get there, are you treated respectfully? Do people ask you for your insurance right away? Then I'm like, is there another way to do this where people will feel welcomed and feel a calming spirit there so that they can get the help they need for their loved one?
Yeah. And, all the vaccination story that you have, and both in terms of trusted messengers and the 100% adoption rate, but also in terms of those structural distance to travel, I think about how that applies to mental health, and then the broken system of mental health care that you've just talked about. I have to remain hopeful and optimistic in the work that we do. And I do find that by modeling and making it very normalized to take care of my mental health and my family's mental health in the various ways that that means, certainly leaning on professional mental health providers when needed, but it's so many other things in the home and in our neighborhoods, in community. When you have that friend group where you can talk about these things, it normalizes all of it, and you can actually take so much of this, to heart and really start living it out in a different way. I have one sort of terminology question that I'm very interested in getting your opinion about, and it's the term determinant versus driver, as in social determinants of health and social drivers of health outcomes. Because when we think about suicide, we at AFSP really try to emphasize all of those points of intervention, prevention, resilience building in that upstream manner that we heard you talk about. And the term determinant does sound a bit more set in stone than driver. So just would love your thoughts if that's of interest to you, or what you think about it.
Well, it's a great question. I will say I am what I would call agnostic around terminology. I feel like one of the things that trips us up a lot in mental health is that we get bogged down in terms. And so I spend a lot of time on definitions and like trying to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And Toni Morrison said definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. And so I'm like, I want to make sure that like we are defining things and we have control over these definitions. And at the same time, I also think like whatever word you need to use to get the point across is also fine with me. And so when I think about determinants and drivers, I will say that there's a lot of research to show that the term determinants and even social determinants, it doesn't resonate with people and people don't understand it that much. And so I'm actually all for using other terms. And I do think that drivers really actually gets to the point. Maybe in a way that the word determinant is somewhat more confusing. So I'm okay with calling these things drivers. And I do think that resonates more and like connects more with people. And so I'm okay with that. I tend to like fall back on the terminology that I learned in. And so I'm also working on like trying to update my own terminology around these things too. But I'm all for whatever term really kind of resonates most and reaches the most people in terms of why these issues matter and why they're important.
I'm kind of ditto. I was smiling because I've been in meetings where people are arguing about this, and people tend to think drivers are more causal. I think the problem though is in mental health research, it's hard to determine if something is causal. And so because of that, I feel like we get lost in that. And meanwhile, people are still sick and people are still dying. So I think, and to be honest with you, with the kinds of research models that we use now, even when things are very highly quote unquote determinant or correlational, we treat them as if they're causal because you can build these elaborate equations. So I think we're getting kind of lost in the weeds with that.
All right. Thank you for bringing me out of the ivory tower cloud and back down to feet.
No, I think it's a good conversation, but I don't, in my lifetime, I don't think I'm going to see that resolved. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And it is a really important conversation to have because I do think language is the thing that trips us up so much and prevents us sometimes from taking action. And I think about like, because I study oppression and I study the way like populations kind of seize on terminology, it's standard for people to want to define things. And it's standard for people who've been oppressed and marginalized it's good and I think normal for people who are oppressed and marginalized to claim claim language and use that language for power. And then that gets me into trouble because I'll sometimes refer to people as patients and they want to be referred as clients or consumers or any number of things. And so it's a constant battle, but I think it's incredibly critical. Like, I do think it is incredibly important. And I do think it's really important for us to respect that terms can be different and people resonate differently with different terms, and that it's important for us to kind of respect all of those differences.
Yeah, I love that. In the suicide prevention field, as both of you know so well, terminology really does matter and has needed to evolve. And that's been driven very much by lived experience perspectives alongside the science. So I love this conversation. Okay, quick, don't overthink it. What would you like people to take away today that could be applicable in their lives? Just leave us with some practical guidance or hope.
Well, I'm known for overthinking, so that's a hard question for me to try to, but let me just, to do my best, I will say, I would say, without overthinking too much, it seems daunting, the amount of work that has to be done to try to move us towards equity and justice. And I think that if we spend too much time feeling overwhelmed, we're not going to take action. And so I always ask people to walk away thinking of one small commitment that they can make in the direction of equity and justice. And so make one commitment to yourself, and that will start all of us on the path to where we need to go. And I feel like that's a good starting place for everybody.
Love that.
I would say, I'll do two. I would say I think in the moment of crisis and with the rates going up, it's very hard to think about primary prevention. But to do that, you really need to shift your paradigm. And I think it's really important to shift the paradigm because our rates really have not gone appreciably down in 30 years. So what we're doing now is not working. I think we all have good hearts and we have good intentions, but it's not working. So I think it's time to shift the paradigm. I think on a really practical side, what I share with people every day is do something for yourself today where you play. And if you have to put it in your schedule or whatever you have to do to get it in there, because part of suicide prevention too is finding joy even in the smallest ways. And if that's your playing your video game or doing needlepoint or doing a jigsaw puzzle, my husband just bought me a jigsaw puzzle. And he's building a sunroom for me so I can put the jigsaw puzzle in it. And I was kind of laughing. It's a little expensive to do that. But my point to you is that look at the smile on my face when I talk about jigsaw puzzles, because that's something I did with my mom growing up. And so there's little things that we can find every day to share joy with each other. So those are my two things.
I love that. Thank you both so much. We're going to let you go at this point, but we are so grateful for your expertise and for just really bringing it and laying some foundational concepts in our minds as we move forward here with this first webinar on health equity and suicide prevention. And we'll carry on in the future as well, just remembering this foundational conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Vic, I think back to you.
Once again, such a huge thank you to Dr. Shim and Dr. Malik and Dr. Moutier. And part of our goal with today's webinar is to lay the foundation for understanding health equity and suicide prevention, including how to engage with communities differently, how to follow their lead in identifying needs and in implementing solutions. In order to demonstrate this, we sought out community-based programs created by and for the communities they serve. We looked for programs that were demonstrating measurable impacts in suicide prevention, help-seeking behaviors, and stigma reduction. They could also be transferable to other communities. In other words, could you potentially replicate this initiative someplace else? It is now my honor to introduce today's spotlighted program, CommuniLife's Life is Precious. Established in 2008, the Life is Precious Latino Suicide Prevention Program is a project of CommuniLife, a leading nonprofit housing, health, and human services agency serving New York City's Hispanic community since 1989. Life is Precious combines individual and group counseling, creative arts therapy, academic support, music, nutrition, and wellness activities, and family service, and connects families with psychiatric services provided by partnering clinics. As Life is Precious shares about their dynamic program, we invite you to put any questions you may have for them in the chat, and I will rejoin you all for Q&A after the presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, Life is Precious.
Thank you, Victor, for that presentation. I'm Dr. Beverly Raudales. I am Community Life's Chief Program Officer. I'd like to thank the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, particularly the Health Equity and Engagement team, for inviting us to this very important conversation and summit where we talk about suicide prevention. Community Life, as Vic just mentioned, we've been around for 37 years. We are a nonprofit located in New York City, servicing and addressing, gaps that may be occurring in communities, and piloting different models that will address, those needs. Our vision is that no one should be without the housing and support they need to lead a healthy and meaningful life. Our mission is to provide vulnerable communities with housing and culturally sensitive supportive services. We really do a lot of data analytics to identify what community needs are there. How can we help communities build healthier communities, safer communities, be informative, and then put programs that will, deliver beneficial outcomes. Out of that, we operate 2,756 units of affordable and supportive housing. We have transitional housings where individuals work on developing, activities of daily skills, living, and then transition to next step housing, permanent housing. We also piloted in 2012 our medical respite model. It is unique in New York City. It addressed the needs of patients that were currently hospitalized, were medically stable, but didn't have suitable housing. Our medical respite model now is included in the 1115 Medicaid waiver. So we are very excited that it's now considered a billable service and will allow the opportunity for many individuals that are in the hospital systems, are medically stable, but don't have housing. We have our Life is Precious, which is what we're here to really showcase and the benefits of what this wonderful program has done since 2008, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. We also have our care coordination program, which we have more than 500 individuals were connected to medical care through our Health Home Plus program. And that's just an additional support for individuals to make sure that they maintain stable health. In 2008, and we'll talk a little bit about that, we did a lot of data research. But just to show really, the number of individuals of young Latina adolescents, out of the Latina population, 53% of them felt sad, lonely within 2 or more days in a row. 25% were seriously considered suicide. This comes out of the 2023 CDC survey results. And this just shows the magnitude of our Latina population with our young adolescents and the suicide ideations and suicide attempts. Of course, these numbers have increased as a result of, the pandemic. Risk factors, with the Latina population, we have some universal risk factors: poverty, under-resourced schools, peer pressure, social media, influence, and certainly a very pivotal one because, who isn't on social media? Substance use, traumas that include sexual abuse trauma, domestic violence. We also have risk factors within Latina adolescents: acculturation stress, family conflicts over autonomy and wanting to be independent, the familismo, which is, a protective risk factor, immigration status, certainly the immigration status has increased this year. A lot of anxieties over the uncertainty of family immigration status and what may happen. Families certainly, that have been affected, right, by our current immigration status. We also have emerging risk factors, vilification of immigrants, especially the Latinx community, fear of deportation, family separation, economic and housing insecurity, and limited access to health care. Community life in 2008, we had a Article 31 mental health clinic in the Bronx section of New York City. In our mental health clinic, we saw a spike in teen visits to our center that were there for, episodes of depression, suicide ideation, or maybe were connected because of a psychiatric hospitalization due to suicide ideation and attempts. And how did we respond? We determined that there were no culturally responsive programs in New York State, much less New York City, to address Latinas' suicide behaviors. There were no recognized strategies in SAMHSA's registry or SPRC tailored to Latina young adolescents. Community voices were missing. There was an urgent need for focus groups and engagement with local leaders. As a result, Community Life, established focus groups to get feedback from the community, especially parents, school systems, what the need was and how can we respond. We also had, sponsored by the office, the New York State Office of Mental Health, we did a research that materialized into stigma around mental health clinics, the fears, the mistrust, the cultural barriers limit access, school personnel viewed with mixed feelings, seen as distant or unhelpful in emotional crisis. There was family engagement is crucial. Healing must include parents and caregivers, and that was pivotal in this program, as you'll see later on in our programming, that really revolves around family and making sure that family is involved. Academic support and activity matters, connection through tutoring, clubs, mentorship, peer mentorship, and then safe spaces, safe lives. These young adolescents need a welcoming place to talk and, most importantly, be heard. And then what is Life is Precious? And this is where I turn it over to Julie Lawrence, who is our Vice President for the Life is Precious program and is on the ground, with all of our campuses and so forth. Julie?
Thank you, Dr. Rodalis, and thank you everybody for welcoming us to present Life is Precious. So what is Life is Precious? We often call it LIP. What and where do we operate and how do we do the work? I think kind of based on some of the research that Beverly just talked about, the heart of LIP is really the creation of a safe space. Our participants need to feel at home. They need to feel loved and supported. And that's what we have intentionally created in 8 amazing Life is Precious programs. We started in the Bronx in 2008. And we've created since then 7 additional programs. We currently have 8. We have 4 in New York City, and then we've expanded outside of the city for the first time. We're in Hempstead, Long Island. We're in Amsterdam, which is upstate New York, and then Poughkeepsie and Yonkers. And so we have served over 1,500 Latina teens in our since we've been existing, and our programs have really been open to the teens and their families. I'm happy to report that not one completed suicide has happened on our watch, and we really pride ourselves in creating these safe spaces where our adolescents can be heard. For so long, youth, and particularly marginalized youth, have not been at the table. They haven't been involved in talking about solutions to the issues and systems that impact their lives. And so at Community Life, we listened, and our programs offer these safe spaces. They offer school support and academic support and advocacy and access to resources. We're designed with and for Latina youth. We can go to the next slide. As you can see, this is sort of the timeline of the Life is Precious program, which began in 2008. We opened new sites in the city in 2009 in Brooklyn, and then Queens and Washington Heights, which is a part of Manhattan that is considered Little Dominican Republic. We're in Poughkeepsie and Yonkers and Amsterdam and Hempstead. We offer the programming in an after-school setting. So at each site, they operate from 3 to 7 p.m. with different activities and groups that happen. And in the summer, we offer like a day camp model. So girls come to our program during the day. We also do a lot of activities on the weekends, especially to involve more parents, as we know that they're often working hard during the week. So in order to become a participant at Life is Precious, we do have certain criteria. You have to be a Latina teen between 12 and 18 years of age. You have to be in middle or high school. And if you're not enrolled in school, you have to be willing to enroll in school, and we can help with that process. The teens we work with are living with suicide ideation, depression, or other forms of mental health challenges, or at high risk for that. And we really need parental consent because we want them to be participating in our program and get the same support that their young people get. To make this all happen, we have dedicated staff. We have bicultural, bilingual staff who really are committed to the work we do. They also all love youth and youth development. I've been in some spaces where people who are working with young people don't actually like young people, but we really make sure that's a criteria as well, because we see the hope and joy of young people and their potential. So we have Beverly as one of our leaders. She's the Chief Program Officer at Communilife. And then our program model is with the Vice President, which is me. We have an Assistant Vice President who helps a lot with our northern centers. And we have a program director who's helping with the city sites. At each site, we have a program coordinator who's usually a master's level social service provider, social worker, or mental health provider. We have case managers. And then on site, we also have daily tutors who come in, and we have different creative art therapists, from music therapy to art therapy to dance and movement. And then we also have an amazing administrative coordinator who helps all of the sites sort of function properly. In addition to that, we love and welcome volunteers who've helped run some really great groups. They've helped with cooking activities. And currently we have two MSW interns and one intern who's in college level. So what do we do? What are our services? I think the heart of it is the holistic case management. We are very much youth guided. What the young people who come into our program tell us they need is how we try to address their needs and come up with solutions that is driven from what they are telling us. We have safety planning and advocacy. Our youth development groups is really a core component as well. We utilize positive youth development principles with trauma-informed practices and really offer a chance for the young people to form a community and build cohesion among themselves. Things like Leaders of Tomorrow, which practices civic engagement with our young people. We are helping them learn how to be leaders in their own lives and in their own communities with a focus on social justice and equity. And then we also try to have fun. We play games, Fun Day, Yum Day. We have fun food and fun games and different activities to really build young people's strengths. Expressive arts has been a critical component of the program. While the work we do, we really try to enhance the fun with the young people. We know that they're coming from spaces of a lot of trauma, a lot of sadness, a lot of social anxiety. They can't often express what they want to. And so using the arts has been a really powerful tool to help young people express themselves, to help our Latina teens see their beauty and their worth and create these amazing pieces of art, which I think will be shown a little bit in some of our slides. And then academic support. Young people told us school was not easy for them. They were having academic challenges. They felt misunderstood. They couldn't always understand. Parents told us they couldn't always communicate with the school personnel. So our case managers and program coordinators do a lot of school advocacy to help with parent meetings, to help advocate for the young person. And then our tutors come every day, and we have tutor time. And the young people come and do their homework. They get support on essay writings, on college applications, all of the things that they need to advance and succeed in school. And then health and wellness. We really try to think about the mind-body connection, and we have healthy eats every day. Young people come to us hungry, and so we really make sure to have healthy food. We help with meditation and yoga, and then we also help bring knowledge of mental health awareness to the community. And a key part of this work is with the families. Young people don't have suicidal behaviors or depression in a vacuum. We really need to talk with the families, engage them in the work that we're doing so that they can heal too. Often there's intergenerational trauma and a misunderstanding of what their young person is going through. So we utilize a lot of case management with families as well, and then parent support groups and creative arts activities to get the whole family involved in the healing process. To kind of piggyback on the family work that we do, it's about building connection among families so that they don't feel alone. It's a very overwhelming feeling when your teenager is going through this and might be hospitalized due to a suicide attempt, right? So we're really helping build a network of families and parents and caregivers who can support each other. We celebrate holidays together. Families are welcome to each holiday that we do. We have great activities and different wellness activities and fairs. We have the parent support group, which is held in Spanish. We have self-care groups. Our music therapy has taught parents relaxation exercises and really brokering parents and helping them understand and destigmatize mental health challenges. And so we utilize a lot of Spanish-speaking psychiatrists that we've connected to and others in the field who can help normalize the situation that they're going through as well. Other things to note is that an important part of the Latino culture is the family, right? And so often in New York State, and I think throughout the country, the family work isn't a part of the mental health treatment that teenagers get. They're often excluded. And so since we know the importance of involving the parents, we work with many of our high-risk cases to help them get connected to a culturally responsive therapist that we have connected with. And so that's been a really critical piece, especially with our high-risk families, helping the whole family learn to function better, learn how to communicate better, and to be on the healing journey together. This slide just sort of highlights the amazing impact of the creative arts that we use. This teenager in our Washington Heights site said that, music is more than just listening to music. The space that we created at LIP for her is a space of tranquility and of love, right? Music is universal, it transforms, and it's life-changing. And so we see that through the arts, we're changing our participants' lives slowly and surely. Because, like I said, the work is not in a vacuum, we have to look at the systems that our young people and our families are dealing with. We have to work with the other social service providers, with community-based organizations, and a big focus of our work is in this outreach and mental health awareness raising. We participate in many fairs, in school fairs and health fairs in communities. We go to parent association meetings in the schools and different coalition meetings that we're all a part of at each of our sites to really build awareness of this issue and to help bring resources to the people who need it. To emphasize the amount of work that it takes, we're going to look at 3 months of services at LIP, right? And you can see that there's over 6,300 case management activities done with the teens in our program. That means helping them connect with services. That means doing safety plans. That means checking in with them. It can just mean a phone call to say, hey, I'm thinking of you. A really comprehensive youth-led case management services. And then the other 1,200 or so activities that we do really focus on tutoring, our music therapy, our parent support groups, our creative writing, our creative arts therapy, outreach, and then an English class that we offer to all of our parents on a weekly basis. Because they told us sometimes they're not comfortable talking to their school, their students, their daughters' teachers. And so we're helping them with English to get more comfortable and to get to be able to advocate for themselves. The story of Life is Precious is really a data-driven story. Like I said, we have not had one completed suicide among our participants in the 17 years we've been open. 99% of our high school seniors are graduating and going off to college. We have 2 program alumni who are Life is Precious staff. So that really brings the program full circle. These are young people who went through our program, went to college, and then came back. And it's a really exciting part to see that it works. And we'll be hearing a little bit more about that later. We've served over 1,500 Latinas and their families, and we also have an alumni who's an intern. And to see it in action, we're going to show a quick video for you to kind of see the work that we're doing firsthand.
I didn't have friends. I didn't know who to connect to. I didn't know who to socialize with.
From pressure that I attempt to hit my head or hit myself.
My goal is to live my life, but in a happy way, because last year wasn't a good year.
I mean, nobody teaches you, right, how to talk about things that are heavy on you.
And now I'd love to introduce Altagracia to the webinar to tell us a little bit about her journey with Life is Precious. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Altagracia Montilla, and I'm the case manager at the Life is Precious Poughkeepsie site. I actually started as a participant with LIP many years ago at the Bronx site. So I've been part of this program for a really long time, and it's been amazing to see how much it has grown, and even more amazing to now be in the position where I can give back and support the next generation of Latina girls. Growing up, LIP has always been such a big part of my life. It has shaped me into the woman that I am today. I love the support that LIP gave me growing up, the coping skills I learned, and knowing that I had a place where I felt heard, surrounded by other girls who shared a similar cultural background. What continues to draw me to LIP is what it represents. It's a safe space created to uplift, empower, and support Latina girls. And that's a mission that I believe in because I've lived it and I've seen firsthand the impact that it has on young people. I am so eager to now be part of carrying that impact forward. Doing this work has inspired me to keep pushing myself, to continue my studies, to earn my MSW, and to grow into the best version of myself so that I can better serve others. Most importantly, I want to be an example for my Latina girls. I want them to know that anything is possible, even when life feels overwhelming or hard. And looking ahead, my future includes obtaining my license and continuing my clinical practice. I want to keep learning and understanding this population because this work is always evolving. And the more I grow, the more I can support and empower the girls who rely on LIP. My journey with LIP has been transformative, empowering, and resilient, and I'm so grateful to keep passing that on. And I'll pass it on to Julie.
Thank you so much, Altagracia. So we just want to go to the next slide that talks about the research that we're doing. From its onset, we believed that we needed the research to show the effectiveness of this community-driven approach to suicide prevention for the Latina teens we serve. We have empirical evaluation of the Life is Precious program done by Columbia University. Our phase 2 is in looking at the control group research, and it's been completed, and it does show a decrease of suicidal behaviors when someone's in the program after 30 days. We have the program model and a fidelity model ready for distribution. In 2023, SAMHSA recognized us as a Mental Health Equity Award, which was really excited. And then the following year, we were recognized in the National Suicide Prevention Resource Center, and we're included in their best practice registry, which means that learning and working with the community you're serving is really important and effective. We have a few published articles on the effectiveness of the program, and these are their names, and we'd love to share them with you if you're interested. Next, what's the future of Life is Precious? What can we look forward to? Well, we really aim to be the first SAMHSA design designated community-informed, evidence-based model of care for Latina adolescents and suicide prevention. We hope to expand our education and awareness initiatives around the country. And we hope to expand the Life is Precious program to the communities nationwide because we know it works. We want to thank you for your time, and we are open for questions.
Well, thank you all so much for that fabulous presentation. I had the opportunity to visit your site some months ago, and I was blown away by just witnessing the young people in the space and how at home they seem to feel in the space. I also had a chance to see that very impressive music room that Julie mentioned. So just incredible work that you all are doing there. One of the things that you mentioned was that early on, when you were even conceiving of this idea, that you didn't see a lot of resources on the national level that spoke to the needs of the communities that you were aiming to serve, and that really addressed the needs of the Latino community. But since that time, you're now on the SPRC practice registry. So you've broken that ground. And you also were the 2013 recipient of the AFSP's pilot grant. So you've also impressed us with the work that you do. So you're making strides in this space, which is really important. One of the things, though, that has been a part of you creating this resource and this space is really blending those evidence-based practices with those community-informed practices. And that's one of the things that always resonates with me, because I know that for a lot of communities, much like what you described early on, a lot of the evidence-based practices were not based on evidence from some of the communities that we serve. Can you speak a little bit more about the importance of blending those evidence-based clinical practices with those community-informed practices?
Julie.
Okay. Sure. Thank you for that. I think you're right. Often when we hear about evidence-based practice, to get to that level, it costs lots and lots of money, right? You need to do the research for over a long extended time, and programs, often the grassroots on the ground programs don't have that kind of money to show the effectiveness officially, right? And so we've been blessed with CommuniLife to really have been invested in researching the work that we're doing to show that community-driven responses can reach the next level. And so, like you said, we do blend the evidence-based practices of positive youth development, trauma-informed care, right? And we integrate that into how we see and know the community is asking for. And so I think it just takes organizations like CommuniLife who are really willing to invest in that in order to, over an extended amount of time, really invest in that research and development in order to break the barrier.
I would imagine also it's very difficult to build those community-based practices and those community-informed resources without having a trusted relationship with the community. So that also seems to be something that you all benefit from. And you mentioned your work around research and utilizing the research to build your program. And there are a lot of programs that will be listening today, community-based programs, that probably have not thought as much about utilizing research. You also talked early on about your use of data. Can you also talk about the importance of having that data and research as a basis for building your program for other programs who are wanting to do the same types of things that you've done with Life is Precious?
And thanks for saying that, Vic, because that really is our intention in this summit, is to encourage, right, that this type of model can be replicated anywhere. But you need data and you need the research. You need the research to, really derive what type of data are you going to need, because data is what we use to speak to foundations, is what we use in the research to support, right, the programming when we're talking to elected officials. It helps us support the importance of, and the need of this program. It helps us also to collect the data from the voices out in the community, and that's what happened with the focus groups. But you have to start by really canvassing your communities. Where is the need? How is the need? And then who are those research foundations that can help push this along? We have certainly, Life is Precious has evolved. Since 2008, we're now talking about, really following our graduates all the way through college, and having that data, right, that supports, yes, we can get them from 12 years to 18 years of age and make sure that, we reduce the suicidal ideations, and that we cultivate and develop healthy families. But we also want to track them down, and make sure that they go through college. We know the anxieties that are attached, particularly that first semester, that first year in college. And to do that, we need data. So we're now starting to, capture data with those graduates that went to college, who finished, who didn't. And we actually are applying for, more funding to help support that effort. But that is the whole goal, is that this model can be replicated in any neighborhood, any community, nationwide, if there is a need.
Fantastic. It gives me great pride to say that the AFSP has funded research with Life is Precious. Were you going to add something, Julie?
No, do you guys see me? I'm sorry, because my screen is black. I don't know what happened. No, I was just going to add the importance of doing the needs assessments of the communities that you want to present programs to, like Beverly was saying.
Yeah, you're frozen, Julie.
Yeah, I don't know why.
You also talked about wanting to continue to grow and to expand this program, and part of what we want to demonstrate with a lot of what we're sharing with the series of webinars is that programs that are built for and by the community can be replicated and can serve other communities. You've actually moved in other parts of New York, but you've moved from more of an urban space to much more of a rural space in some of the upstate areas of New York. What has that been like? Have you had to make any fundamental changes, or have you found that the core principles of a community are the same, and that you can transfer those from one community to the next?
I don't know if Julie's frozen. So they're transferable, right? And the need is, I think the need is the same, whether it's in Amsterdam, whether we are in Poughkeepsie. What we have noticed, and Julie can chime in, is transportation, right? So in rural areas, the transportation of getting to a program are not as accessible as they are in rurals in Brooklyn, Queens, New York. So we've had to make modifications. For example, in Amsterdam, we did have the conversation with the Office of Mental Health and say, hey, we really want to get, these young ladies into the program, but we need a vehicle. And so our staffing pattern did change a little bit. We had, we added a driver. The state agreed to give us extra funding to purchase a vehicle so that we can get the participants to the program.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you guys can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, because I can't see myself, but I think Altagracia can also talk about the impact of reducing barriers to care with the vehicle, because in our Poughkeepsie program, we do have a vehicle, and it's really helped tremendously with the programming. Would you like to say something about that, Altagracia?
Yeah, sure. So when I first started, we didn't have a vehicle when I first started at the Poughkeepsie site. And during that time, one of the main barriers were the transportation. We had parents who were working and kids who, well, at least in Poughkeepsie, there's not even a school bus. So a lot of kids have to walk home. And from like the nearest school to our site, it's like a 20-minute walk, 30-minute walk. So I think that was one of our biggest barriers, just the kids not being able to get to program.
And I would also say, I would add that in the more rural areas, as much as the stigma there is in the city around mental health, it's even increased in more rural communities, and especially for Latina families. And so kind of trying to break down that barrier and that stigma with education, and really partnering with the folks who are already on the ground doing youth work, right? And helping bridge youth work with mental health development. And so it takes a lot, but you have to look at your community partners, and you're not coming in to take over, right? Like, you're an additional support for the folks that they're already working with. And so helping them see us as a benefit to their work has been really incredible.
Fantastic. And again, as we have community members and folks representing community organizations that are listening to us today, what kind of advice would you share to them? Any practical ideas for viewers to take back to their families, their communities? And as a part of that, I'd also like to know specifically from Altagracia, how can people find mentors and trusted messengers in the community, people that they can trust to tell their stories to?
So I think something that you look for is someone that's relatable, someone that you feel comfortable with, and a space where you feel like it's a safe space where there's confidentiality, where you can tell them something and you know that they're not going to judge you. Yeah, I think those are some of the qualities, right, that you need before to share your story.
Yep, fantastic.
I'd like to add that this is an intentional component of Life is Precious, that we bring our authentic selves to the young people. I think teenagers can, read people really well. And if you're sort of fake or not being authentic, they can feel that. And so that we bring our authentic selves and really listen to them and want to know what's happening to them and with them. And so it's consistency, authenticity, and providing opportunities for them to learn and grow.
Thank you for that. And people are sharing in the chat, thanking you for sharing information about this life-saving program and giving them information that they can take back to their communities and their families. So we thank you so much for that. You also mentioned that you build this program with young people, that young people have input into the programming for Life is Precious. And I know one of the challenges we often have in organizations and informal systems is we often struggle with allowing communities to have input, period. But we definitely struggle with allowing young people to have input into the resources that we serve them with. What does that look like? How did you all make that happen?
Well, I'll just start with saying that back in 2007, when we were looking at the program, we, like Beverly mentioned, really focused on focus groups, right? On involving the community. We had them with the young people themselves. What did they need? What did they think their community was lacking? How could they get access to care in a youth-friendly, Latina-friendly way, right? And so I think our initial programming really was based on that. And then we've evolved, and I'll let Altagracia talk a little bit about like our youth councils, where we have the young people at a table talking about the issues that impact them and about what groups they want or don't want. So do you want to talk a little bit, Altagracia, about that?
Yeah, so here at our Poughkeepsie site, we implemented a committee where we have like a president, a vice president, a secretary, a treasurer. So the youth, they have all of these roles that they get to play. And part of the committee is sharing things that they would like to see in programming. We also have like an incentive store, so they get to run the incentive store and decide like how much our price is. They also get to they also have a box where they can share, they can put things in the box and share what they would like without like anonymously, right? So part of the programming is the committee, where the kids get to share what they would like for the program and what they would like to see out of the program. And the rules too. There's just so many things that can be discussed, right, in the committee. But yeah, that's a little bit about our committee.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, when I visited the site, that was one of the things that really resonated with me, is that the young people in the space really seemed to feel like this space was theirs. They seemed to feel like they owned the space and they had a stake in it, and that was really, really impressive to see. So let me get you out of here with this question, because we of course we want people from communities and community organizations to be able to take things away from this that they can take back to their communities. But what we also hope is that there are philanthropists and payers who are watching and listening to this conversation today too. And hopefully there will be some that will say, I want to invest in a program like Life is Precious, and I want to invest in duplicating that program in another community. What would you like for a potential funder or investor, philanthropist, what would you like for them to know and take away from this conversation today?
The first thing I would like them to know is that it's money well spent. We're through data and success stories, we're a proven program that impacts the lives of some of our most vulnerable teenagers and adolescents. Secondly, we're saving the community money by helping reduce hospitalizations, by helping reduce crises that take a lot of economic power, right? And so we're helping build a healthy and strong community. And it's not only for Latina teens, right? It's because whenever we have someone who's marginalized and denied care or barriers to care, that we can alleviate those things, we're making a healthier community for all. And our work also focuses on all school children in middle and high school. We offer workshops for all kids around mental health awareness and challenging folks to really pay attention to this issue and to pay attention to the teens in your lives. Because we know that if every teenager had at least one adult that they could count on in their life, the risk for suicide decreases. And so that's what Life is Precious offers to hundreds of teens a year.
Vic, I just want to add, the message for a potential funder is that a community-based organization cannot get this started or off the ground. They can have a needs assessment, they can have the feedback from the community, but they need, the contribution and the assistance of a funder to get started, before we get the attention of any state, city, or federal funding source. So it's invaluable. And that's what we want potential funders to walk away from the summit, is that they are invaluable to us.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know I said that was my last question, but I am the son of a preacher, so this is my last closing. Because one of the things you also talked about was your involvement in the schools and school system. And I have heard from a lot of community-based organizations that they struggle with getting access to schools and building partnerships with schools. How were you able to build a partnership with the school system?
Through a lot of legwork, getting out there on the ground.
Persistency.
Being persistent, going to school meetings. In Poughkeepsie, we have a new superintendent. We were like, we need to meet that superintendent. So we got a quick meeting with him and then an invite, please come to our space and see the work that we're doing. So it's a lot, you have to be persistent. We all know outreach takes, sometimes many tries, but you have to offer your services to the social workers, to the guidance counselors, have the young people you're working with bring information to the school, right? There are many ways, but you're right. Sometimes schools can be closed, systems. And so, by building trust through consistency and being there in the community on the ground really helps an entryway into that.
It sounds like you were very proactive as well. You didn't wait for them to come to you. You reached out to them. So I respect the hustle.
Thank you.
So thank you all so much for sharing about your program. We greatly appreciate you telling us so much about Life is Precious. We encourage those who are joining us today to reach out to Life is Precious if you want to learn more. We'll drop the address or the contact information in the chat. I want to thank all of our presenters for being with us today. And I also want to thank our audience. And I want you to be on the lookout for Save the Date for our next webinar, which will occur in November. And if you're unfamiliar The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or AFSP, is America's leading suicide prevention organization and the largest private funder of suicide prevention research with local chapters in all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. AFSP offers education, law support, and advocacy programs and events nationwide, including the Out of the Darkness Walks. You can learn more about AFSP at afsp.org. You can learn more about The Upright at afsp.org/The Upright. If you or anyone you know is in crisis, call or text 988 24/7 to reach the 988 Suicide Crisis Lifeline, because you matter. Your life matters. Your pain matters. You are not alone. Thank you for being with us today. We'll see you in November.